As some people get deeper into the back nine, they start to become fascinated by the weather to the point that it consumes their conversations. And Dee, I know you know what I'm talking about. We hear this from people who fashion themselves experts like on things like dew points and nimbostratus clouds and hot air domes, whether it affects their plans or not. And here's my advice to you. If one of these people comes to you, run, flee. If they begin to engage you about something like atmospheric rivers, just get out of the conversation and know that we are your safe harbor here on The Back Nine.
This is The Back Nine with Dennis Williams and Josh Mora.
Dennis, my friend, good to be with you. You know what I'm talking about, right?
You missed one of my favorites.
Which one?
They started to use this in Buffalo, and I don't know where it came from. Bomb cyclone.
Bomb cyclones. That's so good. When did they start that?
It was like I don't know. They didn't want to call it a blizzard, so they called it a bomb cyclone.
That's bizarre.
I'm not even kidding.
Well, a new one that I heard recently was derecho. And you kind of went through that recently, right? I mean, a derecho is, and I looked this up, there's tornadic activity, but it's like a straight line of storms and continuous high winds. So it's like all the worst aspects of like a small hurricane and a tornado, only it's in the Midwest.
Yeah, I was in Chicago, your hometown, and staying out by the airport. And yeah, it was crazy. I looked out my hotel window and there was all this like tornadic activity in the greater Chicago area. And they said one was right near O'Hare where I was. And I'm telling you, these trees were blowing like crazy. It was nuts. It was nuts. But it wasn't a tornado. It was a what?
Derecho, which is Spanish for right, to the right. And what's really interesting, so last year, we were in Chicago basically the same weekend that you suffered through this derecho
right.
when you were there. And just before we got there was a similar line of storms. And I think, therefore, you're the one who's bringing the derechos to Chicago.
I do. I think that is absolutely true. I do think it's the ultimate, like, I don't have anything to talk about, small talk. That's what people do.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, weather.
Right,
weather
which is why
like,
older folks
they're like,
go there.
How about, yeah. It's been hot lately. Yeah. Wow, has it been hot? Is it humidity or what?
And now there's so much more information. They say stuff like, well, I feel it in my trick knee. I can always tell when it rains.
Yeah.
We have a good trick. Yeah. It's not really a trick. We just have good people coming in today. Two relatively new friends of ours who have a podcast of their own. It's called Insights from the Couch. I want to bring in Colette Fehr and Laura Bowman. And Colette and Laura, it is so great to see you. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're recording this morning. Tell us, you're both therapists with slightly different but similar practices. Maybe tell us a little bit about yourselves. Laura, why don't you go first since you're on my derecho as I'm looking at my screen here. And tell us kind of how you got into what you do and how that has translated into your creating this podcast for yourselves.
Sure. I am a individual therapist in Maitland, Florida. And one of the things Colette and I have kind of gotten interested in, kind of obsessed by, is the idea that at midlife, there are these two paths and that people can really stagnate or you can really activate. And our podcast is Mental Health at Midlife, Insights from the Couch, is the idea that we want to inspire women at midlife into activation, coming alive, growth. And so that's our mission. So as a person who sees individuals, I get to see this firsthand because people don't come to you when they're doing great. They come to you when they're stagnating and they're stuck. But Colette runs a different kind of practice, and I'll let her tell you what that's about.
So first of all, thanks so much for having us. We're so excited to be here. And I'm a couples therapist. So I work exclusively with couples, which is typically an unusual thing and maybe arguably even a crazy thing to choose to do with your life all day, every day. But I got into this because I went in through a very painful, difficult divorce when I was young with young kids. And my husband at the time and I sought marital counseling and worked with someone who really did more harm than good. And I didn't know anything about therapy or psychology at the time, but I could feel in my bones that what was happening in the room wasn't right. And it motivated me after my divorce to go back to graduate school and really learn to specialize in this, not so everyone has to stay together, because I don't believe that, but so that the marriages and the couples who did want to stay together could. And I see a different context from Laura in terms of the stagnation at midlife. It is a very common time to divorce during this age group. I think the two most common times are right after you have kids, and then kind of the empty nest phase when people may have been disconnected for a long time. So I'm seeing both men and women going through, whether it's a midlife crisis or just a midlife search for meaning, and that can really manifest in relationships.
What's interesting about that is that empty nest piece. I want to pick up on that because we have a lot of people that listen to this show on the back nine and are going into that transition. A lot of our peers, friends, I have friends going through it now, and I've seen some of them, their marriages break up. I've seen some stay together. Maybe they shouldn't, maybe they should, all of those kinds of things. Maybe you could discuss that a little deeper and what people should be doing, thinking about practical ways that they can survive that, because it really is an enormous transition that a lot of people don't make it through as a couple.
Yeah. So what I see in the couples context at this stage is that people have often been disconnected for many years, or they have had child-centric marriages, meaning the focus has been on the children and or jobs. And of course, not everyone has children, but many couples do. So it's become a bit of a roommate situation. There is a lot of focus on shared experiences, socializing with couples in common, activities with the kids, but there hasn't been a focus on emotional intimacy in the relationship for a long time. So by the time you hit empty nest, you have not only little in common, you have a lack of connection to your partner. And some people are so detached emotionally that there just isn't much there anymore. And you wake up one day and say, you're almost a stranger to me. I don't even know if I love you anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I see women that are very much overinvested in their kids and really have a hard time detaching, have become almost fused with the trajectory of their children. And like Colette said, not only child-centric marriages, but like that is their partner. The kids are their attachment bond. The partner is not their attachment bond. So when the kids leave, there's a huge crash in functioning. And that often co-occurs with the hormone drops that women go through in perimenopause and menopause. So, and we know that the caretaking hormones just begin to decrease at that point in life. So women are often like, I'm done. I'm done being married. I'm done caregiving. And the only people I really care about are the kids. So it begins to break apart or show the already existing cracks that are there.
So there's a lot of things that women are told to do in that situation, and you guys counsel them, but what can the men do in those situations, right? I mean, dealing with the hormone situation and all of that. We get that women have to we've heard, the stories about what you have to do to get your hormones straight and all those kinds of things, and going to therapy and all those things. But at the outside, here's the man kind of taking this all on. What can he do to make this work?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to emotional connection and not allowing your relationship to go on autopilot. Because interestingly, the majority of people who come into my office on the brink of divorce, it's generated by the woman. Men don't, and I'm speaking in broad terms. So for anyone listening who says that's not true, I'm not suggesting it's true of everyone, but there is a prevalence of this where men don't tend to seek divorce. Women do. And by the time they come into my office, they have felt disconnected for so long. And in many cases, they're saying, I have been trying to get through forever. I have stood on my head to try to make these points, and just nothing penetrates. My partner is not responsive to my feelings and needs. And then what will happen is the women will say, you know what? I'm done. I want a divorce. And then often the men are going, wait. I'm ready to change. I'm ready to work. So what I would say to men is the emotional connection matters. And so many men, especially over the age of 40, don't really want to talk about their feelings. They don't want to ask for help. Not everyone, but a lot of people. If you can dive into your feelings and really engage with your spouse with curiosity, with openness, be willing to share of yourself vulnerably, that is what women are most looking for and longing for, emotional connection.
It sounds so simple.
It
sounds so easy.
It does sound simple. And it sounds like a lot of the prescription is before they ever get to you, Colette. And I think for a lot of men, I mean, it's interesting as you guys are talking, I came up and I started to feel a little bit defensive as you were talking about that. What am I supposed to do at that point when, and this didn't quite happen this way in my relationship, in my marriage, in my divorce, but still, we get to this point, okay, now we're coming to therapy, we're trying to solve the problem. So whatever that prescription felt like, it might be a little bit too late at that point. So I guess the question, and maybe Laura, I'll direct this to you, is how do you advise women at that point to reach that man, their husband, their partner, when it is fairly late in the game? They're already feeling disconnected. How can the guy hear what she's saying? How can we help the woman hear, our partner, our spouse hear, hey, well, things aren't so great for me either. I feel as disconnected as you do, even if I haven't vocalized it to this point. How do you help the women hear what the man may be saying?
Well, I mean, I think what Colette's saying is that by the time a woman's really ready to act, she's like been a burned out pursuer. So she's very much been trying to like voice these things and they haven't landed well. Then they're ready to move. They're ready to act on it. And that becomes a panic or crisis point where men are finally ready to lean in. But I think you're absolutely right. Like men, the emotional lives of men, like Colette and I just did an entire episode on that. Mm-hmm. And getting a man to come into the office and really sit with his own dissatisfaction and pain and hurt and sadness. I mean, these are things that men are not trained to deal with, that their careers sort of do not train them to sit with their own pain. So it is not natural for them. But when a couple, and I know Colette will agree with this, when they can partner when they can look at each other and say, hey, look, neither one of us are doing that well. We're not that happy. Let's like address this as a team. That's the best case scenario where they can both acknowledge the unhappiness that each of them feel. But very often it's one person who is advocating for like a homeostatic reaction. Like, it's not that bad. Things are fine. And one person who's like, I really can't do this anymore. So it's when you can get on the same page.
We'll be right back. Listeners, you know I've been talking about Pete Learning for a few weeks now. Pete is an out-of-the-box training department that helps companies of all sizes reach their company training initiatives. So picture this. Your company leaders hold all kinds of institutional knowledge, but it takes time for them to create and manage the training that it takes to share that knowledge and other company objectives with their employees. And that's time away from what those leaders do best. That is where Pete comes in. Pete uses artificial intelligence, AI, to create robust, threaded training curriculum quickly and inexpensively. Put simply, Pete is an indispensable partner for any growing company. It is win-win at every level. So visit Pete Learning at pete.com. That is PETE.com.
Three Bridges is proud to be a sponsor of the Back Nine. My business partner and I founded the company in 2019 with the simple premise that we wanted to be the best storytellers for your brand. Let's be real here. We say bring your brand to life because if you don't have video, your brand is either dead or dying. We recently completed a project with a huge resort out in Colorado Springs called Garden of the Gods. We produced multiple videos that I am personally very proud of, and more importantly, they are thrilled with them. If you want to see our work, check out 3 Bridges Consulting on our YouTube page. That's the number 3 Bridges Consulting on YouTube, and see how we can breathe life into your brand.
All right, back to the show.
What if it is different and the man has like given a lot and he is kind of open emotionally and the woman still shuts down? Like what What's the best scenario in that situation? And do you run into that too?
Yes. I'm working with a guy right now where we're circling the wagons around. He's the one who's really dissatisfied in the marriage, and he's given and given. And it's a sexless marriage. It's all the bad things. And he's finally going, I don't know if I can't do this another year. I can't do this another 5 years. This can't be my life. And they're in marriage counseling. And so he's bringing that dissatisfaction into the couples session. But I'm helping him grapple with the fact that this is not the kind of marriage he wants. And he's capable of more. So.
And then Colette, what do you do in the couple situation when that happens, when the man is given a lot and given everything he can and the woman shuts down and has been shut down and just worried about the kids and just rides it out, and it is a sexless marriage and all of that? How do you handle that?
So I handle all of these scenarios in the same way, which is that it's often not too late. Even when people come to me, for the most part, it isn't too late. If there's even 1% of a person that still wants the marriage, things can turn around. But the methodology is the same, which is to deal with the interactional pattern of the couple, because it all starts with addressing the elephant in the room, whether it's the man feeling more disconnected or the woman or both. You have to acknowledge that you feel disconnected. You can't get anywhere if people aren't getting real and honest about that. And then we dive into not necessarily the issues, but how do you talk about the issues? Because if you can allow the feelings to come up and sit with the pain of the marriage not being where you want it to be, then we can start to get into a deeper dialogue. And that alone is a form of intimacy. The real problem is that people are avoiding conflict, and therefore they feel disconnected and lack intimacy. So if you have a sexless marriage with a woman who's shut down and not interested anymore, we have to start by being courageous enough and curious enough and vulnerable enough to talk about it. And often people really do need help navigating those conversations.
Yeah, and finding their way back to intimacy. And it's not just women who shut down. Sometimes the men shut down also. Your podcast, and again, the podcast is Insights from the Couch, and it's relatively new. And you talk about other topics as well. There was a great one about body image, which was mostly for women, but I took quite a bit out of it as well, and what men can do to help women with their body image and their own body image. You also had an interesting one about finance and how couples are responsible with money, which I think is an issue in couples that are on the fence about whether they're going to continue or not. And also as you get into second relationships, second long-term relationships, second marriages. Maybe you can elaborate on some of your points that you made in that podcast and talk about the role that having open conversations about money matter in intimate and joined relationships.
Yeah,
Well,
go ahead, Laura.
I think we talked about the way women see money in a relationship. And this is a little antiquated, but it still holds true a little bit, which is that the man's money is very often everyone's money, and the woman's money is her own.
Why is that? What is that perspective? Where does that come from?
It's just an old traditional, like, you pay all the bills and my money's for Botox. My money's for clothing.
Shopping.
I might pay for like a trip or something. I don't know, something. And this is totally different. And like what Colette sees is that the younger generation splits everything. So it's much more equitable. But everybody comes into a marriage with their own baggage around money, their own family story, their own fears and insecurities around money. So yeah, you got to talk about it. You got to know people's money story.
Colette, what are your thoughts? How do you help couples navigate the money discussion?
Yeah, so I think it's something people don't really want to talk about and often make assumptions that the way I see money is the way you see money. And during courtship, people still tend to, whether younger or older, fall along more traditional lines. The man's paying for things. That's considered gentlemanly and chivalrous. And by the time people get into deeper relationships, they don't know what they don't know because they haven't faced certain financial hurdles together. So they default on their family of origin patterns and ways of handling money. I mean, I grew up in a household where my dad's a doctor and my mom's a lawyer, but my dad was the one who paid for everything. So that was the template with which I viewed money. Old school paternalistic, right? The man pays. And my early life marriage, there was an enormous income disparity between my ex-husband and I. He made a lot of money. I made a very little bit of money. So he also paid for everything. Now I'm in a second marriage where we both have our own children and financial responsibilities, and we grew up very differently. My husband grew up on a farm in rural Kentucky, and I grew up outside of New York City. So we have a wildly different socioeconomic background and also perception of how money is shared and addressed. So it requires a lot of communication, the willingness to address expectations, to be flexible and open-minded. And what I see in a lot of second marriages, regardless of income disparity, is that couples do not tend to share their finances. It's separate accounts. And this is the same model that I see in younger couples. I will have younger married couples, let's say in their early 30s, and they'll come in for couples therapy and say, this week, charge my card. Next week, charge his card. Right? They alternate. And that's not the formula that I had in my early marriage. So I think the most important thing is you got to talk about it and be honest, and don't be afraid to say, even if it sounds awful, I grew up expecting you to pay for everything, but I'm open to doing it a little differently. Can we talk about it?
I think our generation, the people on the back nine, I mean, you can almost simplify it. I think women are attracted to men who have their shit together. And part of having your shit together is having money, right? So it's as much as it is about paying, it's about having it established that you could or would. It means it's an attraction for women to have guys that know, because it says more than just money. It says that, you know what I mean? Like, you know how to hold a job, you have your own company. Like, there's so many things that surround money that aren't just about money. So I think, and I don't know if that's true of millennials or other generations, but I think our generation, no matter how like equal rights a woman is, she still has that instinct to want to be with a man who has it together. I mean, we talk about this on dating apps. Like that's an important thing. I wanted to create a dating app called creditscoreonly.com because I think credit scores match people, right?
Yeah. And I think you're onto something that is really biologically driven, Dennis, whether people want to acknowledge it or not. Women tend to seek security and stability, and finding a partner with resources goes back, to caveman times. So it's not just about being materialistic. It really is the sense of, I have a partner who has his shit together. I can count on, he's got resources. I'll be safe.
Let me talk to your guys real quick, because I see a lot of men 40 plus who are in second relationships. And one of the things we spend a lot of time talking about, I feel like I'm an estate planner, but is taking care of their kids from their first marriage, which is such a huge priority for men, and taking care of their new partner, because women want to be planned for and cared for. I mean, financial security is one of those things women, as they age, become very hyper fixated on. And men have to be able to advocate for their children, who they care so much about, and their own estate. And this is where you have to really empower men to have very open conversations and be very assertive, because men get into people pleasing too. And they overpromise of like, oh, we're going to do, you can't be all things to all people in your life, but you can have an insurance policy, and you can be very direct about things are going to go a third, a third, and a third. And so I talk to men a lot about that, and they get very concerned about how to care for everybody.
Yeah, and how to manage any possible resentments that might come between a second partner and their children. I think you guys are both onto something as well. And I think the podcast is onto something. And it's really interesting because you're talking about similar topics, women on the back nine, as we are to men on the back nine, and they exist in parallel. And I think we should come back together and compare notes often.
Yeah,
because this is a really interesting. There's a lot of stuff that has come up here that, as you guys are talking, that I'm feeling that I don't particularly like, and I think that's a good thing because it's causing some discomfort, and that's good.
We don't talk about the weather. That's what we do not talk about.
No, us either. Us either. Just for the jokes, just for the laughs. Laura Bowman, Colette Fehr, Insights from the Couch is the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Great. Well, they're terrific. And Dennis, I'm serious about that. There were some things that came up here that I didn't particularly enjoy feeling. And I think
what were
in the
they?
beginning, I'm trying to process a little bit of it, but I think in the beginning, first of all, I think they're fabulous. So and the topics themselves are fabulous. But what was coming up was in their opening conversations, and I'm curious if you felt this too, was from their perspective of what they're hearing, the assumption is that the man is in the wrong, that the man has been the one who has disconnected, that the man is the fault. The woman has invested in the kids and the man has invested in his career. That may not entirely be true all the time, but that when they get to that point, it's not that maybe the disconnection has occurred because the woman has invested in the family and taken that lead and chosen to put her love, adoration, affection towards children and not the connection towards the man. That bothered me, that assumption. And I think it's true for many women.
That's why we flipped it around. That's why I asked the question about the men who have given a lot. I mean, not to get into our own personal journeys, but I know what I gave to my marriage and it still broke up, right? So it was awesome that they did say that we have men that come in and they are in, and I have friends that are in this, that where the woman is shut down. She's focused only on the kids. It's a sexless marriage, those kinds of things. That is more common. They didn't start with that, but I think that they came around to the fact definitely an issue too. So I think it's both sides, and I think it really comes down to this idea that parents invest so much into their kids and they disconnect emotionally. And it's why sometimes these second chapters, these second relationships after the kids, if you can't hold it together, if you can't figure it out, are better because it's about the two of you. And the other thing about the second chances that we talk about in these second relationships is you're together because you want to be. You don't have to be, right? Like there's a situation where you could say, wake up one day and be like, okay, we don't have any kids together. We're not connected. Like let's move on. I think, and that sounds terrible, but it gives strength to the relationship. It gives credibility to the relationship because you don't have to be there.
Right. You choose it every day.
You choose it every day. That's a great way to put it. You choose it every day.
And I should add this too, to what I was feeling before. I'm sure that if a woman heard some of the things that we've talked about in our podcast, she'd feel the same way, right? Some of that is just, c'est la guerre, the war between the sexes and the responsibilities and the expectations that we have from our families of origin about where we're putting our emotions, where we're putting our affection, where we're putting our energy. And of course, we also talked about where we're putting our finances. And I think with the perspective from the back nine, in the relationship that I'm in now, and I'm sure I don't want to assume, but I assume in the relationship, I don't want to, but I'm going to do it anyway. Assume that you've had these conversations because, as they point out, we do have responsibilities to our new partners, responsibilities to our children, and the discussion of finance, right? And how important it is to be able to talk about what our expectations are and to be clear about those things. I feel in the current relationship, had those conversations when I was just starting out with my ex-wife. I don't think we ever really had those conversations. There was just a hope we would make a whole bunch of money and everything would take care of itself. And that's a regret that I have that we didn't have those discussions. I don't think it was a factor in why the marriage didn't work out in the end, but it still would have created healthier conversation about money then. And I think it's good advice for how to create healthy conversation about money now.
Yeah, I think my relationships have been the women want to be independent. They want to either have their own job, have their own money, but all of them wanted you to be the man, that instinct that we talked about, the provider, not necessarily providing everything, but having the resources to provide a lot, right? Whatever that percentage is. I think what no woman wants of our generation is like the deadbeat, right?
Of course.
The guy who's sponging off you. But women emotionally get attached to guys and still do that. They still do that. It's not what they want, but they still will get emotionally attached or they'll be with someone who they have to take care of, right? And that comes from trauma, from their childhood or whatever, where these women have to take care of someone. and it's almost like their kid, right? That's how
that's
guy
gross.
is, right?
That's totally gross.
But
yes.
that happens, but it's not what women want. I think women do want, like I said, a guy who has the same credit score.
Well, and I think in a broader perspective, there's lots of ways that both women and men provide, right? I mean, I think sometimes men provide by having a big job and a big salary. Sometimes it's because they're always available for their family and their kids, right? They are invested in their children. They're not mutually exclusive, these things, of course, but there's lots of ways to be emotionally connected by being present with your partner, your spouse, even if you're not making, especially in this day and age, right? There are a lot of women who have big jobs, as they should, more than ever, right? They're presidents of companies. Oh, yeah. They've started their own companies. Often men are supportive because they're on the board of their partners' companies or whatever it might be, helping to provide bandwidth and time for that woman to be able to pursue that career. So there are lots of ways for men to provide in addition to money, which is why the conversation about money, who's paying for what? How are we handling these situations? What is yours? What are you having for you? What am I having for me? What are we having together, and how are we paying for all of those things? I didn't happen for me, but I have certainly seen it cause a lot of friction in the relationships of friends of mine.
Well, there's a lot of opportunity now before you get married, and it's not necessarily just a prenuptial, but to have like a financial agreement before, and it clears everything up to know what each partner has.
Correct. Coming
into the relationship, into the marriage. Makes so much sense now.
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't matter when, like, I was a kid when I got married, right? I had nothing. I was negative balance.
So you're building everything together.
You're building everything together. Yeah. But at this point, if you're going into a relationship with somebody and you each have assets, and then you've got kids you've got to take care of too, and a will and all those kinds of things, it behooves every single person to do everything and be 100% transparent before you walk down the aisle, before you make that commitment, not because you think something bad is going to happen, because it's going to make you guys stronger because you're transparent.
That's right. And you're doing it together.
Right.
You're conscious about what you're and it's so great to have these conversations about all of these things, to understand how women are feeling, how men are feeling, and how we can all be better together. That's part of the goal of this podcast, and it's part of the goal of the Insights from the Couch podcast. So we thank Colette Fehr and we thank Laura Bowman. We look forward to talking to them again, and we look forward to seeing you next time on The Back Nine. Hey, listeners, we just wanted to thank you for being a part of our community to date. We love the feedback you've given us to this point as we continue to build The Back Nine above and beyond what we're already doing.
Yeah, help us by following, subscribing, and or downloading and sharing with your friends and family as well. We have lots of plans for how we can continue to provide good perspective and fantastic resources for all of you. So join us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or your preferred platform, and know that we are incredibly grateful for your support.
Yeah, we are. We look forward to seeing you in person soon, hint, hint, and knowing that you're out there making the loop with us every week on The Back Nine. The Back Nine is flawlessly constructed by Janine Stella and recorded at Pixelworks Studios in Delray Beach, Florida.